Welcome to the Academy, where we discuss and seek a change in long-term athletic development. My name is Ben Wellenbach, and I am the dad of two girls, strength coach and owner of Be Fitness. It is my desire to help educate and shift the way our current culture operates regarding long-term athletic development. I started skating when I was 5 and playing hockey shortly thereafter. It was all I ever wanted. If there was open ice or free skates, I was out there practicing. I loved the game. I loved everything about it. It just seemed to make sense to me and my personality. I was born in Philly and then moved up to Boston. The Flyers were my team, but the Bruins were hard to root against. I went from going to games in the historic Spectrum to the even more renowned Garden. As I continued to play hockey, I was introduced to Mike Boyle through a USA Hockey event. It was a turning point for me, and when I met Mike, it gave me the avenue to utilize something some of those other talented guys didn't take advantage of, which gave me an advantage back. It was strength and conditioning. It became a multiplier. Our guest today interviewed Mike a month or so ago and spoke about this very concept. Kevin is the director of performance for the Boston Bruins and has had the opportunity to not only support this at a pro level, he also has made an impact at various other levels. He's also a father of two, so there is this further reason and excitement to hear from him. As I do with every guest on the podcast, I will pair each guest with a sneaker from the Nike collection that best represents them. In 1972, Nike introduced the Bruin. In 2015, they redesigned the shoe under the Nike Lab division, fitting our guest today, having his PhD in what can't possibly be a coincidence. This is the same shoe Marty McFly wore in Back to the Future. Being a director of performance at the highest level in hockey requires the same ingenuity, foresight, and execution as traveling in time. The level of pattern recognition and prediction allows him to best adjust his direction with a player and team. Even though we have never met until today, it is evident to me that he has a love of family and coaching. This shoe is versatile for training and style like he is with coaching and family, and it's an absolute pleasure to have him on the podcast today. So, Coach, welcome, and thank you very much for taking some time to share some lessons learned for long-term athletic development.
Thanks for having me, Ben. That's quite an intro. I got to look that shoe up.
I'll send it to you. It's pretty wild. It's the one that it's not the magnetic one, the really cool one in the Back to the Future 2, but it's the one that almost looks like the Forrest Gump shoe, but slightly different.
Two classic movies there, so I'm honored.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the best place, or what I'd like to do, is to really start from the beginning. Like, where did you grow up? What were sports like for you growing up? Was it structured? Was it unstructured? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I grew up in Westchester, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour west of Philadelphia. And I played a little bit of soccer when I was really young, 5 to 7 or 8 years old. And it was right around that time that I started ice skating. We found I have an older brother that's 3.5 years older than me. And the two of us kind of started playing hockey at the same time. We certainly didn't come from a hockey family. My dad, no background in it. As far as that, I don't even know if he had ever put skates on until afterwards. But yeah, there were a couple kids that lived in the neighborhood that had a set of rollerblades and were playing street hockey. And my brother and I picked it up from there. And I think both of us really fell in love with the sport almost immediately. I had played a year of baseball when I was 9. I joke I was the best pitcher and catcher on an 0-16 U9 baseball team. Take that for what it's worth. But I just absolutely fell in love with the game of hockey at a young age. And that was all I really wanted to do. We took our teeth into that, started playing. I played a couple years of in-house as a squirt and then moved on to a club team and just slowly climbed the ranks year over year. with some different local organizations, and the whole time it was a blast. We loved every moment of it.
And then did you, as you played hockey, did you continue to do the baseball? Did you continue to play other sports, or was it just hockey?
No, it was just hockey, which, I kind of joke now I have the hips to prove it. I think that's one of the looking back in hindsight, there wasn't, I don't think, as much information, certainly not available to me at that stage, of the benefits of playing other sports. And I certainly wasn't pushed into it from my family or anything else either. It was just, I just fell in love with hockey, and that was really all I wanted to do. We had, for most of middle school and high school, I was playing on a club team and a school team. And then when the season would wrap up, there'd be some spring leagues, which are more fun. There's not practices. You're just kind of screwing around with some of your friends from the different schools or different programs around the area. And then I did a little bit of summer league, but similar. I think it was more an opportunity to play with some kids that you don't get to play with as much during the season, more so than, now, where it seems like all the summer hockey is really showcase oriented. This was almost more like organized pickup. Played, there was several years that the ice rink in our hometown, when they opened, they had two sheets. Now they have four. And at some point along the way, they would melt one down, and they just had a concrete slab. So they ran a roller hockey season over the summer that I played in a few years too. But my most of middle school, and certainly most of the middle school years, we'd get home from school and we would just put rollerblades on and just play street hockey until we couldn't. And then if it was raining outside, my brother and I would hole up in our garage and just pass pucks back and forth to each other. And so there was some heated one-on-one battles along the way there too. But no, it was pretty much, I would say, from 9, 10 on, it was just hockey straight through.
Yeah. It sounds like, too, there was a bunch of unstructured play in it as well, like just picking stuff up and playing.
Yeah, I think a lot of my favorite memories were just playing street hockey in the neighborhood with the kids. Oh, and
Yeah.
I think we'd show up every day and it was, all right, how many guys do we have today and who are they? How can we split up the teams? We'd occasionally make some rules to just spice things up. And we did that all the time growing up. And like I said, it was almost school's over, drop the bags, go meet on the streets. And then when people started to get called in for dinner, then everybody would divide up. But we'd spend hours out there. And if other kids weren't available, then, like I said, it was just my older brother and I would go out there and either run ourselves through some drills and some different challenges, or occasionally we would just play one-on-one until somebody cried and went inside the house. But we had a lot of fun back then. But yeah, it was definitely, I think, way more unstructured, get the kids together in the neighborhood. And that was something that, as I transitioned on to college, and then even really when I was in high school, you started to see, I'm probably aging myself a little bit, but there's, I remember feeling in real time like video games were starting to replace playing outside, that kids were more likely to be hanging out in the basement and playing video games than they were setting up, pick up hockey or baseball or football or whatever the case was, games outdoors. And it's been interesting. We, after college and everything, we moved back to the Philadelphia area. We lived in Center City for a bit, and then we moved to South Jersey for several years. And we almost never saw kids outside. Even when the neighborhood that we lived in was a family friendly neighborhood, there were certainly lots of kids there, and we never saw kids running around and playing outside. And that's something I've really appreciated about where we are now in Massachusetts, is we see kids outside all the time here. And I don't know if the pendulum is starting to swing back in the other direction and that's true everywhere, or if this is just a community thing that people feel more comfortable and the kids are more likely to do it. We see kids throwing a football around, playing basketball. Seen a few times kids are riding their bikes down the road with fishing rods hanging out of the front of it. It reminds me a little bit more of what I remember growing up.
Now, if you're now that you're at the level that you are, do you run into guys, both that say new guys like rookies coming in, or even veterans, that can you tell or can you see guys that have played hockey all their lives and that's all they've done versus guys that have done exactly what you did. Just go outside, pick up, even if it's just like playing around. And can you distinguish between them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. Obviously, there's a ton of variability in each individual athlete, but I think as general statements, the guys that I guess I should backtrack a little bit here, Ben, and say that if we took everybody on our NHL and AHL roster and said, how many of you played a sport other than hockey through high school, the overwhelming majority, like almost all of them, would raise their hands. So it's rare that we get somebody at this level that has only played hockey. I think the ones that have really leaned into playing predominantly hockey at young ages and not as much of keeping a balance through later years with other sports. The things that I noticed with them is that they tend to be a little bit clunkier of a mover. They're the ones that are more likely to, if we're going through skipping patterns and dynamic warm ups, they're more likely to skip with the same arm and the same knee at the same time and do some things backwards, and some of the transitional sprinting patterns and some other things off the ice are not as easy for them to pick up because they don't have as diverse of a movement library that you develop from playing other sports. So if you play soccer, you're shuffling and opening up and turning, and importantly for the examples I just gave, you're running on feet, you're not just skating. You develop a lot of these movement skills and the body awareness by just being exposed to patterns that are required in other sports. The other thing that really consistently is the players that play a lot of hockey year round, by the time they reach our level, their hips are in trouble. They're the ones that are more likely to have progressive femoroacetabular impingement. They're the ones that are more likely to have more consistent hip pain and adductor strains and things that they're dealing with on a regular basis. And it's just a wear and tear issue. They've put a lot more mileage on their hips. There's some different bony adaptations and structural adaptations that can occur as a consequence of that. And the long term consequences of that are you either deal with it or you get surgery, or in some cases, it progresses to a point that it forces people out of the game. But that's another thing that, like I said, I noticed pretty consistently with the ones that lean hockey heavy early and year round at a young age.
So not only do you see it in terms of performance, but you're also seeing it in terms of risk of injury.
Yeah, I think obviously there's a trade off a little bit in the more time you playing your sport, the more you're going to develop and progress your skills in that sport. And there's also an exposure element of learning how to read the play and understanding some of the dynamics of the game once the puck drops. And you get that by one, I think, having an awareness and looking to learn from those situations. But two, you get that from just exposure. There's a lot of benefit, obviously, to playing a sport and to accumulating some time within the sport. The trade-off is that the earlier you push that, the faster you start the clock on some of the negative consequences from a long-term hip health and a long-term energy standpoint. There's a balance there that I think it's not that playing the sport is wrong. It's not that even getting some touches in the off season is necessarily problematic. It's I think, and we may talk about this, but I just think youth sports, the pendulum has swung so far in one direction, which is commit to one sport early on, play year round, over focus on competition, over focus on success in game as defined by game outcomes, opposed to development and learning. And I think a lot of those trends are not only responsible for forcing a lot of people out of sport at young ages. You can talk to USA hockey, soccer, basketball, baseball, any of the majors in our country, any of the major governing bodies for youth sports, and all of them will say the same thing, which is that there's a mass exodus out of the sport around 13 or 14 years old, which is too young, obviously. I think there's probably a balance that we're on the wrong side of right now as far as pushing year-round sport participation at the expense of the not just long-term health, but the long-term participation of the athletes. And I know you're passionate about long-term athletic development. There's also an aspect of you're starting to fill up a smaller cup if you start early specialization in some of these team sports. So we can dive into that
Yeah.
later if you want. But
Yeah, I think first you're bringing up a bunch of points. I spoke with Alwyn Cosgrove 2 weeks ago. It is now, and he said there's definitely a problem. We know that we've got to find a way to fix it. He also said, which I can understand, there are certain cases where we've got this very small window for, let's say, gymnasts or figure skaters, where it does make sense to potentially specialize early on. However, the biomarkers, and we can lead to the next question on this, but the biomarkers in those sports in particular check a lot of boxes in gymnastics and in figure skating, because the statistic, to your point, is actually 70% of kids are stopping sports, not just stopping one sport, stopping sports by the time they're 13. That is not only staggering, it's scary and alarming, because sports, for me, that's like the game of life. So much is learned from that. Forget about the skill side, it's all the intangibles of competition and what it means to have some true adversity and such. But maybe we can speak to these biomarkers with what you've brought up. Are there certain things that you think every kid, even teenager, should know or have the ability to do?
I think you brought up gymnastics and figure skating, and those are two examples of what are categorized as early specialization sports. And it's pretty simple. And I think it would be helpful if we started by at least defining, per my definition, what elite is in a sport. And I think because now, there's teams locally, it's the U8 elite. There's no elite 8-year-olds. And people don't like when I say this, but an elite 8-year-old they're a bad athlete. Elite is professional or national caliber, and that's it. That's where the line is drawn. Elite means professional. It means you're one of the best in the world at whatever the sport is. Everything under that is developmental. And what in gymnastics and figure skating is that the elite, the world champions that are competing in the Olympics, that are competing in these international competitions, frequently are under the age of 18. So that is why it's an early specialization. That's why those are early specialization sports. You take the best 12-year-old hockey player on the planet and you put him in a professional hockey game, and he's going to really struggle. You put the best 16-year-old player on the planet in a professional hockey game, and he's going to really struggle. You put the best U16 gymnast in the planet in an international competition, and they may win. That's the difference. So, for all of the non early specialization sports, you have to identify where you want your finish line to be. And the faster we use this analogy of filling up a cup, there's also the larger you build the platform, the higher the peak of the pyramid can go, whatever resonates with people. But the idea is that at early ages, if you play multiple sports, you're exposed to different movement patterns, you're exposed to different movement skills, you're exposed to different dynamics within the sport. As far as soccer, there's different aspects on the field of how you're going to be pressured, of where your teammates are, of looking for different outlets, how to move the ball. Basketball, same thing. Baseball, there's rotational power elements and learning how to field and track things that are coming at you. There's a lot of these specific either movement skills or aspects of understanding closing space or creating space that you can take from other sports, that even if your goal at 8 years old is strictly to be a professional hockey player and you don't care about any other sport at all, you would still be better off by playing multiple sports for as long as possible. And that is strictly from a physical development and cognitive processing side of things, let alone the fact that you learn to interact with different teammates. You learn to interact with different coaches. You're going to play different roles on those teams in different sports. So you learn to be a little bit more diverse in how you can contribute to a team and what your presence on that team means. Opposed to if you're the best hockey player at 10 years old and you're only exposed to being the best on your team, at some point you're going to play on a team where you're not the best. And taking that feedback from the coach and understanding how to fit within your team and support your teammates and still be a contributing member of that team. Some people pick it up on the fly. A lot of kids don't. And I think that's one of the other really damaging things of having, aside from me sarcastically quipping that there's no elite 8-year olds, when you tell an 8-year old that they are elite, they start to view themselves as elite. And along with that means I'm better than everybody else. And as a consequence, I may not need to work as hard to stay better than everybody else. And when you reach, again, like the longer you stay in a sport, if you're competitive and you want to continue to play at the highest level you're capable of, it gets narrower. There's going to be better and better kids that are coming in to play on those teams that are competing for those roster spots. And odds are at some point you're going to face some adversity and you're not going to be the best player. And if you've been told that you're elite and you're better than everybody else your whole life, most of the time those kids quit because they're not prepared for it. And you had alluded to this earlier, but there's tremendous value in team sport participation in preparing kids for the real world, for what comes after high school and when they need to enter the workforce and need to work in some teams or work as an employee somewhere and take feedback from bosses and coworkers and how to navigate a lot of those situations and some of the adversity that life throws at all of us. You get exposure in how to handle a lot of those situations from participating in team sport, and a lot of that's lost if you're just parading around as you're the best player on the team and just stick with this one thing that you're really good at and don't worry about challenging yourself in other areas.
My I had interviewed one of my coaches from the prep school I went to back in Mass, and he says, and I love this, that sports are the classroom of life. And so much of what we learn is via sports as a vehicle. And I don't think there's anything like it, quite frankly. I know for me, if I have a coach that's interested in coming to coach with me and the rest of my team, I prefer, and I don't know about you, but I prefer knowing that someone has competed in sports, at least through the high school level, but ideally at a collegiate level as well. Because I just think that no matter what level of, let's say, collegiate you are, you're still such in the minority of student athlete out there that I think it says a lot about the individual and their character.
Yeah, there's no and their stick with itness. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the most valuable things that I personally have taken from sport is that I got relative for hockey. When I was in high school, a lot of the kids that I played with had been skating since they were 3 or 4 years old. I didn't put ice skates on until I was 7. It sounds crazy to say, but I was already a late starter and played in house as a squirt as a 9 and 10-year-old and didn't play club until Pee Wee, which there's in the Boston area where we are now, there's man, 4 or 5 what I think are classified as tier one youth organizations within 20 minutes or so of where we live in Dedham. And there just wasn't where I was in southeastern Pennsylvania. There wasn't that exposure and that opportunity. It just wasn't as big of a sport at that time. So when I was coming up and starting to go through that tryout process, I got cut a lot growing up. I just wasn't good enough. And I love the game so much that getting cut really fueled a lot of what I referenced earlier, which was my older brother and I. We were playing and it was unstructured, but it was with the intent of getting better and improving so that we didn't get, so I didn't, I'll speak for me, not him. So I didn't get cut the next time that I showed up at a tryout a year later. And that's really what led me into strength and conditioning too, that I had an opportunity to play for a coach that was probably ahead of his time as far as the emphasis that he put on off ice training. And I was not super eager to start that process at 13 years old. I think it was more that I wanted to be on that team and I wanted to play on that level. And I got pushed really hard off the ice to find, I guess, a part of myself that could recognize that I was capable of working harder in those areas. And once I saw how much better I felt on the ice as a result of all the work that we were putting in off the ice, I was hooked right away with this idea that I can start putting in extra work in not just some of the skill elements off the ice, but I can also put in extra work in developing myself physically. And then the next time that I get back on the ice, I'm going to start catching some of the kids that have been better than me over the course of my early career at that point. I think that there is an element of sport provides an opportunity to teach people to overcome some of those challenges and to keep working through getting cut. And that's another, I don't know. My son now is 8 years old, so I haven't had, my daughter's 5. She's just starting to be exposed to some different sports and different aspects of sports. And my son's in love with literally every sport he plays. He loves lacrosse, he loves soccer. I'd probably tell you hockey's his favorite, but I haven't seen a ton of this as much as I've heard about it. But parents are so concerned with, their kids' feelings getting hurt by being cut from a team that they don't provide that opportunity to do it. They just take them somewhere else before that can happen. And I think there's a little bit of a slippery slope there that you're now shielding one of the main mechanisms for them to learn to overcome adversity and to work through some challenges that, everybody that is living in the real world as a grown up has been passed over for jobs and promotions and raises and even applying to colleges. You're not always going to get in. And I think that getting cut it's hard. It's unpleasant. It could also be a major fuel and opportunity for kids to learn how to put in some extra work and overcome some adversity that, is going to transfer to their experience when they're out of sport.
Yeah, so what is the message to parents then?
As far as
As far as, okay, at my facility, we'll have parents that drop their kids off, and like the very first time they come in, it's this introduction. Hey, this is little Johnny or whoever. Kick their ass today. And I like at first when they said it to me, it took me so off guard and I didn't know how to react to it. Now I tell the parents, how about we just look to make them better today? Make them better than when they walked in. And I think there's everybody's got a piece of the problem, right? You've got parents, you've got these now for-profit organizations in youth sports. You have the athletes themselves, the kids themselves that have become difficult to be coachable, quite frankly. And then you have the coaches themselves. So I guess my question was, what is the message or what would you advise parents to do in these situations where there's some tough situations, but I think sports, strength and conditioning provide great opportunities for development. And if we just keep shielding or avoiding, let's say, some of these tough things, like what are we breeding basically?
Yeah, I think one of the big messages I would share is just to let the kids run their own race. I think that this isn't me standing on a soapbox and lecturing on how to parent because one, TBD on how my kids turn out. We got a long runway ahead of us here, but two, I understand that it's really challenging. And there are moments where the kids' behavior and some of the situations that they're in push every parent to the brink. And I realize that, The overwhelming majority of us are doing the best job we can with the information we have available to us. That's my disclaimer. I think where it can get a little bit tricky with parents is they start to look at the kids' status as a reflection of their own. So my kid's on the best team, and now as a parent, it's I raise the kid that is on the best team. And again, I don't. You could probably dig a little bit deeper on some of the psychology and maybe some of the issues there on the parent side. It's easy, even if you go in with the best intentions, it's easy to get caught up in that race that you want your kids. Every kid that goes to school, every parent wants them to get good grades, right? But the kids have to take the tests themselves. They have to do the homework themselves. It You get older, you're going to have to read and study and put in the work. The parents can't be there for them. I would encourage parents to be proud of the effort and the race that their kid is running and not make it a reflection on their own self-worth. And I don't for me, like I tell my son the same three things before every game. I say work hard, have fun, and be a good teammate, and that's it. I don't if he comes off every day, he's dad, I had 2 goals, and I'm like, okay, great. Did you work hard? Did you have fun? Were you a good teammate? I ask him. It's become a running joke with the two of us now that he tells me he scores, and I ask how many of his teammates he set up for goals instead to just de-emphasize. And not that I'm proud of him and I'm happy that he's enjoying that aspect of it, but I'm not hyper focusing on it. I'm not rewarding it. It's not score a goal, we're going out for ice cream, if you don't, we're not situation. It's more I try to look for opportunities where I look for him doing something where he's supporting the people around him, because I think that's a really important aspect of the game to emphasize. But to circle back to your question, for parents, I think it's to just really take a step back and let the kid run their own race and let them steer the ship as far as how seriously they want to take sports. And if they're not good enough for a certain level, this is something that Mike Boyle and I have talked a lot about over the years, that there's also, you might have some kids that could make the best team, whatever that is, the tier one U10 hockey team. They are good enough to make that team, but they will be the worst player on that team. If they play one level down, they're going to be one of the best players on that team. So the trade off is that now and again, there's value in learning how to be in a supporting role, but from a development standpoint, they now in ice hockey, they're less likely to get the power play time and the penalty kill minutes. They're less likely to be controlling the puck play, steering some of the momentum of the game. They're less likely to be scoring the game winning goals or setting up the game winning goals or having some of these experiences that I think fuel the enjoyment and the wanting to continue on in the sport. Now maybe they're marginalized and they're just trying to keep up and they don't feel like they're contributing as much, and that's a road that can lead to kids leaving the sport. There's some value in not playing at the highest level and playing a bigger role on whatever that team is. I Mike and I think, or whatever it was, a decade ago, we had this conversation for the first time. And I think as a general rule in hockey, like if you're not one of the 5 best kids on your team, there may be some value in playing down and whatever the level is below that. And it was interesting. My son went out for travel soccer past year for the first time. So he had played soccer a ton at school, recess, screwing around with his friends, but had never played for a team. And he went to tryouts and they divided up all the teams. I think there was an A team, a B team, and 2 C teams. And he was on one of the C teams. And he was like, I think I could play with the other teams. And we had conversations, my wife and I, and yeah, he definitely is capable of playing on a better team, but he's never played. What are the coaches going to look for in a kid they've never seen play before? Totally fair that he did not make that team. And also let him play himself out of the C team. If he's capable of playing better, then let him go out there, let him play, have fun, hopefully play a bigger role on that team, and then play himself up to whatever the next level is, if that's B or whatever. I think there was an opportunity there. And I know several of the parents that we've gotten to know through his hockey program also coach in other sports. So they're a part of this tryout and selection process. And We've heard some stories of parents are complaining about the placement of where their kid was, and it's not fair. And I think if you're asking for a kid to be on a different team because their best friend is on that team and it's a wash, I think I can understand and relate. That's part of why 8-year olds should be playing sports, is to play with their friends. If it's because you think that they're better than the level that they were allocated to, then I would say let them show it. Let them play their way out of that level over the course of the season. And my wife and I have had plenty of conversations about our son because he's going through it in real time, and we're having to navigate some of these challenges. And even the my best friends on that team, I want to play on that team. You meet new people by playing on teams with kids you don't know. And we've gone through that a few times already, that it's transitioning schools or going to different summer camps or playing different sports and different teams, that my son has made all these different friends now across these different social circles and these different areas, that we barely leave the house now without bumping into somebody that we know somewhere as a result of that. And if we just that at a young age said, like, all right, these are his friends, we're just going to make sure that they stick together, then you miss an opportunity there too to allow them to meet some other people. And I think I had some friends that I went to elementary school with that are still lifelong friends now, but a lot of my best friends growing up I met through playing on different teams in different towns and across different situations. I think I've probably circled around a really long-winded answer to your original question there, but hopefully that helps.
No, it's great because I think it addresses a number of things. Actually, Sean Scahan said the same thing. He said, I would much rather have someone play, be, have more playing time, more playing opportunities on a lower team than not on a higher team. I personally, I've been in both scenarios throughout my own sports career, and I think there were valuable lessons in both, but I also think the timing of when all those things occurred made a difference too, so that your maturity, but your resiliency was also a part of it. I guess I'd like to piggyback on that, but shift just a little bit to the strength and conditioning side, because Mike said it, I believe, on the podcast that you had him on your podcast, and he certainly said it on mine. We look at strength and conditioning as this multiplier. You have these incredibly skilled guys that you're dealing with in the NHL at the highest level. And like you said, everybody there is at an elite skill level. If we just look at that, what separates one guy from the other guy? And it's of my opinion, and certainly was of for Mike as well, that strength and conditioning was one of the multipliers in that. I guess, can you speak to that in your current situation? But I would also say, could you maybe address off season and in season, because it's also of my opinion that I think in season is almost more important than the off season. We get these folks that work so hard in the off season, they get to in season, and then they take this big break from the gym and they come back and they're behind the eight ball. We're having to deal with a number of different patterns or issues. Strength and conditioning as the multiplier, and then like the whole like year-round side of strength and conditioning.
Sure. So let me I you mentioned that at the NHL level that all the players are extremely skilled. I would argue that certainly in the grand scheme of, if you lump every hockey player on the planet over the age of 18 into one bucket, that obviously the players that are competing in the National Hockey League have a tremendous amount of skill. I would also tell you though that there are Division 2 club college players that have more skill than some of the players that are playing in the NHL. And I say that strictly as a way to highlight that there are players on every team across the league that are there because of their physical development, not because of their skill. And it's because they're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster, they have an engine so they can maintain that output. A lot of times these are the guys that are, on the fourth line that are killing penalties that are really hard to play against. They're shut down forward, shut down defensemen. And again, it's not to say that these players don't have skill, but when you think of skill, it's the highlight reel, stick handling through people's legs and picking corners with shots. And those plays for a lot of players are very few and far between. And they are able to succeed at the highest level because of their physical development, not because of their skill. I think what's been really interesting to me is you also see the other side, players that have such a tremendous amount of skill that they're overcoming for either a lack of physical gifts or a lack of physical development as far as maximizing whatever the physical gifts are that they have. And what's really special is when you get a high skill player that also has a tremendous work ethic and has put in the time, not just on the ice to continue to develop and hone their skill, but off the ice to push their physical development, to maintain the mobility, to get into some of the positions they need to on the ice, to maximize their speed, their power, their strength, to be well conditioned enough that they're able to sustain those outputs consistently over the course of a game and over the course of a season. Those are generational players. Those are the Sidney Crosbys, the Nathan McKinnons, the Brad Marchands. You have these players, Connor McDavid, these players around the NHL now that are the ones that define franchises. Those players are exceptionally gifted and are working as hard as they can to maximize those gifts. There are other players, and just out of respect, I'm not going to highlight any of these, but there are players that are extremely talented that do not put in that work. And you may, in some cases, I think you probably would recognize that as a fan. If you're just watching the game, you have a guy that, like, the ceiling is very high but the floor is very low, meaning there's some games they do something miraculous, there's other game they disappear for weeks on end and they're not producing. And that, more often than not, is a inconsistent habits lead to inconsistent performance. Guys that aren't taking care of themselves and aren't putting in the work. And we're talking about strength and conditioning, but there's also the sleep component, there's the nutrition component, there's the habits of preparing on a day-to-day basis, making sure that you're fueling the right way, that you're preparing from an off-ice warm-up standpoint before you go on the ice. All those things matter. And when players overlook those things, they tend to not be as consistent on the ice on a night-to-night basis as well. I think it's important to highlight the full spectrum, that it's not just a strength in off ice training isn't just a force multiplier as far as taking an even playing field of skill and pushing certain players ahead. It also allows less skilled players to compete at the highest level. I think that that's an important aspect of it, because everybody's ceiling in the different areas, everybody's ceiling as far as, if you did everything the right way, how good could you possibly get? How good could you develop, or how well could you develop your skating? What's the ceiling for how you could develop your puck skills and shooting? There's That's one aspect. There's also the, how well can you think the game and what's your ceiling there, and how fast can you get, how strong can you get, how well conditioned can you get? And everybody's ceiling in those areas is different. So there can be really high skill players that don't think the game particularly well. There can be really high skill players that think the game really well, but even if they did everything the right way, still may not be fast. And I think it's important to, from a athlete development standpoint, to really look at what are the different areas that contribute to my development, and am I exhausting every resource to maximize that development across those different areas? And I think obviously our backgrounds are in strength and conditioning. Some of the people you've referenced is learning from and having on your podcast and these conversations with, their backgrounds are also in strength and conditioning. And I think that gets highlighted a lot in our field and in these discussions because it's the easiest one to control. Everybody everybody has access to an opportunity to train. And obviously there's better training programs than others, and not everybody has access to a facility like yours, but there are opportunities for people to put in work away from their sport that are going to translate into them improving their ability to play across the board. And I think that's an important message too, as far as being able to control what you can control and your effort, your attitude, working hard away from the sport. I think those are pretty easy ones to highlight that are going to make a big difference. You would also asked about off season versus in season. And we talk a lot every year after the draft. We have a development camp and we get new prospects that come through the building. And that's something that we highlight with them every year. So the players that, have been to 3 or 4 development camps, I've heard it 3 or 4 times in a row that if you work really hard to make progress in your physical development in the off season, and then you stop training during the year, you start detraining almost immediately. So you're going to start to lose range of motion. You're going to start to lose strength. You're going to start to lose speed. And there's two important messages there. One is that as some of those physical characteristics taper over the course of a season, you're going to enter the most important games of your season as far as the playoffs and competing for championships at the end. You're going to enter that stage of the season in your worst physical condition. The other aspect is we refer to this as the yo-yo effect, that you spend all off season trying to get bigger, stronger, faster, better condition. Then you stop training during the season and you're right back where you started. And then the next off season, you start the same climb and you never really make long-term progress because you're just going in the same cycle. We're going up in the off season. We're coming back down during the year. We're going back up in the off season. We're coming back down during the year, opposed to if you make progress during the year and then at a minimum during the season you stay, and then the next off season you make more progress, now you're trending up year over year, opposed to just reclaiming what you have lost over the course of a season. And I say at a minimum maintaining what you have, because for the prior to working in the NHL, I worked in a private facility like the one that you run, and the overwhelming majority of the athletes that come through there are not professional athletes. You have a lot of 13 through 18-year-old kids that are competing in middle school and high school sports. And at those ages, kids definitely can and should be continually making progress through their in-season training. So now it's not just avoiding starting right back where you started the previous offseason. Now you're climbing in the offseason, climbing slower, but continuing to climb during the year, and then climbing even further the next offseason. And that's where I think that consistent training, year-round training, can be a great equalizer, that it really can give some of these kids opportunities to compete at higher levels if they so desire, because their progress is going to accelerate past the ones that are not putting in that work.
I love the take on both of those questions. It sparks another question, which is earlier you said, let the kids run their own race. I think my biggest regret, and this kind of stemmed from, so my girls are 16 and 14, soon to be 17 and 15. And, this whole thing stemmed from when I was chatting with Mike last year. And he said for his kids, it was mandatory that they trained in the gym twice a week. And it was mandatory because they had a desire to, let's say, go to the next level. If they didn't, he said, fine, we could stand to do once a week, but there should be some bit of strength and conditioning. I have let my own kids run their race when it comes to strength and conditioning and sports. And in many ways, it's been great from a sports standpoint, but in many ways, it's been detrimental from a strength and conditioning standpoint. What are your thoughts for, let's say, both kids and parents in regard to the strength and conditioning when it comes to, do you let it run the race, or do you have some of these parameters in place?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think one of the things you mentioned about that example with Mike is that It's mandatory to train because the kids were very serious about competing at the
Yeah.
next level.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it has to start. I certainly wouldn't force kids, my own or anybody else's, into strength and conditioning if they weren't passionate and committed to the kids. If they were not passionate and committed to maximizing their progress and they weren't really serious about taking the next step, whatever that is, whether that's playing at a higher level, whether it's playing, making the team at the next age group, whatever the case is, if they were not serious about it, then I wouldn't force them into a sport performance program. I also think, Ben, like there's a much larger context that makes a lot of these decisions less black or white. And that's just the total commitment of what being a part of some of these teams requires. And I remember trained a kid that had found me because of hockey at our old facility in New Jersey. And he's one of the best players on a high level. I won't say elite, but on the tier one, I think he was 14, 13 or 14 when we first started working together. One of the best players on that tier one program, played for his school team, one of the best players on that. Also a really good soccer player. He was playing for his school soccer team and a club soccer team. Also a really good baseball player. He was playing for a baseball team. And at one time, all 5 seasons overlapped. He came in one day and he had like a low grade hip flexor strain. And if you've worked with kids, you realize that some of those injuries, they rebound way quicker than they do as they get older, right? So there's some pain and discomfort that 48 hours later they have no recollection of, which is unique to that age group. But that was just a total volume problem. You're the best player on your school soccer and hockey team. Those coaches are going to give you lots of opportunities. You're going to be playing a lot of minutes. And no matter how well prepared you are, the body's going to break at a certain point. And I think that is something that as you're signing up for different things, realizing that these are kids and the kids should have a life outside of sport as well, and managing just the total volume of the commitments is important. And that's something that I personally really struggle with, is that balance of, if you sign a kid up for a team, there's an opportunity to teach a commitment to that team. Meaning, if a kid's tired one day and he doesn't want to go, or it's no, we signed up for this, you're committed to this team, you owe it to them to give it your best from the beginning through the end of the season. Unfortunately, the way youth sports has trended now is that there's way more games. The seasons a lot of times have gotten longer. If they haven't gotten longer, there's you could play soccer in the spring, summer, fall, and winter. They all have different seasons here. So there is no, if you like soccer, there's no opportunity to not play. So it creates challenges with the total ask and the commitment for some of these kids, where I do think that there are cases where missing practice is probably in the best interest of the kid, both from a physical preservation standpoint and even just mentally, to give them a break and to just play and be a kid for a day instead of having to shuttle immediately from school to one practice and then come back from that and then immediately go to the whatever. You're going right to the school practice and then right to the club practice and then coming home, shoveling food in your face, doing homework, and going right to bed. I don't know if that's really a healthy balance for most kids in most age groups. To circle back to your question on strength and conditioning, I think there's an aspect of physical activity has been removed from a lot of school curriculums, and gym class has been minimized. It's not a 5 day per week commitment now like it is in most other, like it was for a lot of places when we were growing up. And I think that there's an importance of exposing people to training and to physical challenges. And there's an aspect of that is important for the individual's health, not just their sport performance. So I do think that most kids would benefit from being in some form of structured training program, call it at age 13 and older. And how often they are training and what the emphasis of that training looks like, and the commitment, I think, is really on a case by case basis. But The overwhelming majority of the athletes that are in middle school that are committed to their sports, they're passionate about it and they want to be as good as they can be. I do think that they should be training twice a week in the off season and at least once, if not twice a week during the in season periods. And it's important recognizing all the other things that I just mentioned: schedule, commitments, keeping things fun, letting them be kids. I think finding really good people that understand it, like yourself, can be really helpful because the best thing for a kid isn't always to add another hour and a half commitment every day in season to all the other obligations that they have. A lot of our players, so our schedule, there's no 2 weeks that are the same for us. Our Sometimes we play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Sometimes we also have a game on Sunday. Sometimes we're playing Monday, Thursday. Every week is a unique challenge. So we sit down and we look at the schedule and we try to identify appropriate training opportunities through a month. And our goal, regardless of what the schedule looks like, is to train twice a week, every week in season at a minimum. We'll have a lot of players that'll do extra work based on some of their individual needs, but that's where we start. Our in season training most days takes 15 minutes, sometimes 20. That is enough of a stimulus for them to maintain their speed, their power, their strength, in certain cases, their mobility, their hip and core function, while minimizing the cumulative fatigue that could then negatively impact what they do on the ice, but then also minimizing time commitment and an ask in that regard. And I think it's even more important to keep that balance in mind for the athletes that are not competing professionally because they're not getting paid to do it. It's not part of their job. I also realize in the private sector, there's a financial cost to the families that are seeking that out, and showing up and then being in and out of the door in 20 minutes isn't always what they're looking for when they're making that financial commitment. But I share that not as a way to say all in season training for all athletes at all levels should be 15 to 20 minutes long. It's more just recognizing the situation that the kids are in and understanding where training fits within the context of that. And I think it's super important that good habits are taught early. I think it's equally as important that the kids have fun while they're in that environment. And that doesn't mean that they're going to love every exercise or they're going to love every part of a training program or a training process on any given day, or that it's easy for them to go through. But it does mean that the coach should make a conscious effort to ensure that the kids are having fun while they're there. Sometimes that's messaging, sometimes that's just how you communicate as a coach with the kid. But it should be something that they look forward to, not a chore when they go. But I do think it's important that there's a commitment year round to that part of the process.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said. I've actually had parents come in our facility and they're interested in having their kids be a part of our youth academy program. And one of the questions I ask is, okay, what's the current schedule? What does that look like? And they go through this myriad of things that the kids are doing. And I look at them and I go, okay, so when were you thinking that this was going to, like, that you wanted to do this? And they said, we were hoping to get some guidance from you. And I said, as much as I would love to have them here, I actually think that they shouldn't be here and they should just rest and be a kid. And they look at me like, what do you mean? Like they can't do anything? And I said, I know you're thinking that you're here and my job is to quote unquote sell you on some program, but I feel like I would legitimately be doing a detriment to your son or daughter because of it. So I do agree with you. There should be some year round thing. I also agree with you that we need to be smart about it. We need to make the appropriate decisions that at the end of the day, from a macro level, are in good faith of the development of the kid.
Yeah, no, I think from a business standpoint, I, I turn people away for the same reason. It's not in the kids' best interest or in the families for that matter. And joke about that a lot now too. It's like, why are these parents like, even if you really wanted the best for your kid. It's like, why are you subjecting yourself as the parent to signing up for six different sports and shuttling everybody around? It's like you go to work all day and then you don't get to decompress or spend some time at home either. And there's a lot when you have multiple kids, you have multiple schedules, and you're going to be pulled in some of those directions anyway. But I question why some parents sign up for some of these things that maybe are a little bit less mandatory, that are going to tax their time a little bit more. But no, I think it's important. If you're looking out for the best interest of the kids, then sometimes turning away business is the right decision. And we did that. We were not set up for, and I'm sure you've talked about this in other episodes of your podcast, but the training for professional athletes should not look the same as training for high school kids, and it should not look the same as training for middle school kids, and that should be different than elementary school age kids. And there's nuances along the way there, but we had parents come in with kids that were my son's age, that were 8, 9, 10 years old, that wanted them to start going through formal training programs, and we would always turn them away too, because our facility at the time was not set up to run training that was appropriate for those ages. And psychologically, and in the big picture for kids at that age, the programs that we were offering were not in their best interest either. And instead of just taking the extra income and squeezing them in, we would just tell them to come back when they turn 13. And I think at the end of the day, Ben, like, as a business owner, you gain a lot of goodwill by making decisions that maybe are not in the best interest, the best short-term interest of the business's bottom line, but are in the best interest of the families in the community that you're serving. And we were fortunate that we had the space to do this. There were situations where we had long-term clients that were going through stretches where it was not in their best interest to come in and go through 3 training sessions a week that were 60 to 90 minutes long. And we would put together basic home programs for them to do on their own. It's, okay, this is, if we were the head strength coach for your team, these would be things that we would ask for you to pepper in at these times to help you stay healthy, maintain your energy, and we would help support people even if they were outside of our walls, because it was in their best interest, again, even if we were not being compensated for it. And not everybody's in a position to do it, I get it. I think big picture, looking out for the community you serve is not only the right thing to do, but it's in the best long-term interest of the business too, because people know. I think it's, even if they, in the short term, Ben said no, so I'm going to go to the guy down the road and he'll take my kids. And we've had plenty of those, and they come back. They end up coming back and realizing, like, that wasn't the best decision. And I appreciate what you told me. I didn't listen at the time. Now I get it. And those tend to lead to more word of mouth referrals and tends to work out okay for the business in the long run. But no, I totally agree. I think it's important to recognize the situation and do what's best for the people in front of you.
Yeah, really appreciate that. The last thing I have for you, because I want to honor your time here, is there something that we should be talking about that we haven't?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I feel like we've covered a lot of our bases here. You had asked me early on what the message is for kids. And I think we weaved around that question a little bit over the last hour or so here. But I think there's a few take homes that I think, as kids are starting to enter that phase of the middle school years where sports start to become more competitive, kids start to take sports a little bit more seriously. There's more tryouts, there's people getting cut, there's different levels that players are aspiring to make. I think, one, strength and conditioning, in our case, off ice training, is a massive part of that puzzle. It's a great opportunity for you to push your own development forward as an athlete at that stage, and also to start to catch some of the players that may have more skill than you do at that time. I also would reemphasize the fact that continuing to play multiple sports is a critical piece of the puzzle, even if you do not want to ultimately play all of those sports in the long term. The best advice I could give you is to hang on for as long as you can. It gets harder and harder, but I think even if you're seventh grade hockey player that was on a club team and playing on your school team, you don't need to necessarily be on the most competitive soccer team or the most competitive baseball team, but continue to play multiple sports for as long as you can and find, even if they are not at the highest level and you're just doing it for the fun of doing it, hanging out with some friends and continuing to refine some of those movement patterns. The other thing that I would say is that sports are supposed to be fun. Try to think that there's one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that a lot of the creativity is being stripped out of youth sports. You take a 10-year-old kid and he tries to toe drag a puck and the other team poke checks it away and then they go the other way and then the kid gets yelled at. You're not good enough to try that move. Don't do that. And I think what happens a lot of times is kids stop working on those things away from their sports and they're not provided opportunities to work on those things in practice. I think one of this free play idea is a frequent point of discussion as being a massive contributor to truly elite skill development. And a lot of kids just don't have it anymore because there's so much structured activity. They don't have the time or they're not being encouraged to continue to do it. And I would put that back on everybody's radar of go home and mess around. Practice things that, if you're a soccer player, like practice things messy and some of these other people do that are ridiculous and insane from a skill standpoint, but try them and continue to work on your skill and to practice some of these things that are fun because I think it's one part of what makes sports fun, but two, it's also a major part of skill development and probably a message in there for the coaches to like let kids try things. And even if they fail, reward the effort, not just the outcome. And because there's plenty of time for that. If you're a Division 1 athlete and you try that and it doesn't work, you're going to get yelled at by the coach. They don't need that at 8 years old. They don't need that at 9 years old. Allow kids to try things that they probably have no business trying. Allow them to fail. Allow them to keep trying. I think that's an important part of ultimately developing those skills so that they may be able to pull things off in the future. If you put the fire out at 8, they have no chance moving forward. For kids, training's important. Play multiple sports is important. Continuing to work on skill development and having some fun and experimenting and trying new things, likely away from your structured team practice. I think that's another important piece of the puzzle.
That's awesome. That's great. Look, as I said, I really appreciate your time, your effort, and your energy within the podcast here. For those that would like to follow Kevin, get more on what Kevin's doing, he's got a Instagram page, he's got a Facebook page. He also has some off-ice programming and websites as well. Is there anything that I am forgetting from how to know more about Kevin?
No, my website is just kevinneeld.com. Easy to find. Instagram, my handle is just at Kevin Neeld. I'm easy to find if people have questions or want to reach out. Those are the two easiest places to do it.
Excellent. Excellent. It's been an absolute pleasure, Coach. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the Olympic break and you get after it in the second half of the season. Although I hope my Flyers can get themselves in gear here because they're having some challenges. But anyways,
You haven't become a Blackhawks fan after all these years, huh?
I am so diehard Flyers. I can't even begin to tell you. I bleed orange and black. When I came up to Boston after Philly, it was so hard to not root for the Bruins, although I loved those years of the Bruins and going to the games. But man, the Flyers just scratch me where I itch.
Well, there's always room for you on our side when you're ready to make the jump.
All right, Coach. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And we'll talk more.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Thank you.